Welcome back to Sledgehammer Horror, guys. I am Ken Sledge, and let's talk horror. Now, today I'm joined by the amazing creators of the upcoming comic book Frost Road. I'm here with Keith Arem and Chris Yates. Guys, how you doing today?
Hey man, thank you so much for having us here.
Oh, such an honor. Chris, how you doing today, brother?
I'm doing good. How about yourself?
I'm a lot better now. I'm so excited that we were able to link up and talk about this. But before we talk about like deep dive into what we're doing here, these guys, like I said, they're the creative team behind Image Comics' award-winning graphic novel Ascend, and they're ready to unveil Frost Road. Now they're going to be starting their Kickstarter, which you know what? Oh shit, it started. And you guys, it is down in the description, so you don't have to go far to find it. Now, we always talk about Kickstarter, Indiegogo, GoFundMe. Why are these things so important? Because you're helping art to get created, and there is so much behind this. It's an apocalyptic horror and suspense, perfect for fans of. You might have heard of these if you're a horror fan. The Last of Us, A Quiet Place, Silent Hill. All these amazing things that mean so much to us as horror fans. And as part of this crowdfunding campaign, this is something I feel is very, very special to us as horror fans. PCB and Arem are partnering with good friends of the channel, James A. Janice and Chelsea Rebecca of Dead Meat, to flesh out Frost Road stretch goal rewards and develop a new immersive audio drama based on the upcoming book. So, what was the inspiration for Frost Road?
Frost was a project that I had started to sort of explore an exploration of kind of where I started in the video game space. And I'd worked on a lot of these horror games. I worked on The Suffering and worked on Silent Hill and had been working on a lot of just horror-based titles and really wanted to get a motion picture made just to be able to tell like the linear side to kind of complement what I was doing on the video game side. And had worked on this about almost 10 years ago. And I was working with Trevor Goring, who's an amazing storyboard artist, and started fleshing out all of the boards. And as we were starting to create animatics for the film and doing other things, I brought in Christopher Schei that I collaborated with on the Ascend graphic novel that we did with Image Comics. And it just took on a life of its own. And we immediately had film offers, and my film career was starting to take off. And I was in the middle of working on games like Call of Duty and other things. And the meanwhile, I'm trying to get this horror film made. And we had a film set up just before COVID, and unfortunately, COVID kind of changed the film industry in a pretty permanent way. And so during COVID, I collaborated with Christopher Schei and said, let's get the movie on hold for a little bit and let's work on the graphic novel. And we
Yep.
finished it this last year. I did a book with Adam Lawson and Wesley Snipes called The Exiled, and we did it as a Kickstarter that was very successful last year. And I realized like this community is just phenomenal and is just such an amazing opportunity for creators to collaborate and create a community with their fans and other creators. And we said, you know, let's take Frost Road and let's make the book and get it out there. And so this is our first step in making that happen.
And that's what's so amazing about this is the word you just said is something that here at Sledgehammer Horror we take very seriously, and that's community. Um, what's good for the goose is good for the gander, and we love the fact that we are in such an inclusive and loving community that all we want to do is help each other and be there. And we all grew up fucking weird, man. Like we're
Right.
weirdos, so to
Right.
connect with these other weirdos is just the coolest thing in the world. So Chris, how did you get attached to the project?
So I actually met Keith through a mutual friend, and basically I've kind of made a unique position for myself in terms of IP, which turns to comic books, graphic novels, video games. To kind of go back a second, I used to work for United Talent Agency and Disney, where I specialized it. And I guess my quote unquote claim to fame in the horror space is I was the assistant who signed James Tynion the Fourth. And he is the gentleman who did Something is Killing the Children, The Department of Truth. And I just loved his work. I knew he was going to be big. And so I basically kind of bet my career on it and said, like, hey, I think he's the guy. And then, luckily that blew up. And then I was able to kind of pivot from realizing I didn't want to be an agent to then being a creative at Disney. And then once my time at Disney ended up, I kind of switched to publishing because I quickly realized that comics was my passion. And then I met Keith through a friend, and I'm like, hey, you have such an embarrassment of riches. Like, how is this not out there? And Keith was very kind. He's like, I need someone to do it. And I'm like, well, I'm not going to put myself out there, but I'm going to put myself out there and say I can help you. And so we kind of just met each other and became fast friends. And I was just let's get to it. Let's have some fun. Let's try and make Frost Road a reality. And so that's kind of where I come in as a director of special projects and outreach, where I basically try and help Keith make these books come to market in a real way with community and Kickstarter. And, there's other things we'll be announcing along the way, and making sure they all stay on track.
Well, and a good thing I was just going to bring up too is you talked about how there's more coming up. I already talked to you guys about how I do have the links for the Kickstarter down in the description. If you have the available funds, it really, you're helping art get created. Yes, you get rewards back for it, but the most important thing is creation of art. But this is just the start. So I do have their social media links in the description as well. So that way you can follow along with them. That way you can stay up to date on everything Frost Road related, and in the future what they're going to be working on as well. So, Keith, what was some of your inspiration for Frost Road?
I've always loved horror. I mean, I grew up seeing films like Alien was like one of my first films that I saw way too young, and it scarred me for life, and I still to this day I just love it. And going back and seeing films like Romulus and being like, oh, that's what I grew up with, right?
Yeah.
And but it was films like that and The Shining and some of these films that were like these like slow burn movies that were just terrifying because it was the psychological horror, I think, is as impactful as just sort of the gore porn that you'll see out there, because and everyone I think in my family has an appreciation of horror, my daughter especially, and growing up with John Carpenter films like The Thing and other things, but they all have that common sort of slow burn psychological horror that what you can't see is kind of just as scary as what you can. And so it was a little less about the blood and a little bit more about the psychological horror. And I remember explaining to my daughter when she was first getting into horror films, she was like, I don't understand what's the difference about psychological horror. And I said, have you ever had like a nightmare or something that just keeps you up at night and you just cannot sleep? Like that's psychological horror. It doesn't matter how much blood you see. It's the idea that the concept keeps you awake at night. And so Frost, really the origins were kind of in my deep rooted background in horror films, but also as an engineer and a musician, I had an appreciation of sound and what sound could be as a weapon. And I was working with other people in the industry, not just the military, but other things where, as I was working on these big video games, you were starting to realize that a lot of these military contractors and other people were using sound in drastically different ways. And I actually
Sure.
had a professor when I was in college that was teaching me, he worked for the CIA, and he was telling me about a thing called the brown note. And the idea was a sound that could actually make you lose all bodily control, right?
Yes.
And so I was taking a lot of that sort of real like science, and I wanted to bring that into a horror story. And so when you see Frost Road, like there's like it's like this really amazing environment that really starts organically from a character's perspective that has no idea what's going on, and kind of unfolds into this world that is actually really based in reality and science. And we just brought it to a human level of something that's actually happening in the oceans and other things right now. So it was kind of cool to bring it to this small town of Frost Road.
You mentioned a couple things like score, sound design, the importance of those in horror. Um, my wife always says that the score can make or break a film. And when you're talking about score and sound design, it's such an important thing in horror because it's all about building that anxiety, building that dread, getting you on the edge of your seat, making you uncomfortable in your own skin. And I love to hear that it's a universal thing with us. So, Chris, how did you guys get Dead Meat involved in Frost Road?
Well, I think that's the best ways is actually I'll tee it back up to Keith because Keith has a longer history with them. Keith, how did you get introduced through a manager, if that was correct?
Yeah, actually, the funny thing is that one of my attorneys in the music industry, because I started in the music industry, really wanted me to meet with Spencer with Ice Nine Kills.
Yeah.
And while that was starting to take place, and that actually is some of our meetings that were happening right now, they also represented James and Chelsea. And Chelsea was very excited about getting involved in voiceover and video games and animation and other things. And as part of my work, we also teach and we kind of give back to the community, not just on the creative side, but also to actors and technical acting for video games. And so Chelsea and I had met, she took some of our classes, and we realized that, between their audience and their love of horror and all the projects I was doing in the horror space, that we really want to collaborate. And we came up with this idea and we did actually a prototype of it this past year, of taking, instead of a podcast or a book on tape, but taking the idea of an old school radio drama and
Yeah.
changing it into almost an Atmos sort of perspective where the whole story unfolds around you. And so we've been working on this thing called Blind Terror, and it's an audio drama series, anthology series of all of these really amazing stories that are all just from a sound perspective. And when we started working on Frost Road, I talked to James and Chelsea about this idea, saying, well, hey, if we're going to do a stretch goal and we're going to actually not just get the book going, but what if we can visualize this and bring the sound together? And they love that idea. And so that's how this relationship really blossomed.
And I know that her love and her desire of voiceover and video game, and it's incredible. And she does an incredible job. Obviously, they do an incredible job at Dead Meat as well. But I know that this is her passion, is doing voiceover and stuff like that. And she's an amazing, amazing artist when it comes to that. We're very big fans of what she does. And I can't wait to see how that comes together. Like, that's a really cool collaboration. And I know that they'll take that so serious, and they're going to grab the ball and they're going to run. So it's going to be very exciting to see. So, Chris, can you tell us some non-spoiler things about Frost Road? Let's wiggle the worm a little bit and try to get a couple nibbles
Ooh.
here.
Yeah, I guess a fun way that we can tease Frost Road is that, and Keith may stop me if I'm going too close to it, but I say it could be almost a zombie movie in reverse.
Okay.
So it's something we haven't really seen. Again, I don't want to tease it, or I don't want to spoil anything, but it's something you haven't seen, and how people are being affected, and how this town is consumed or affected by this sensory stimulation. And I think another thing with that is some of the talent we have that is going to be a part of it in terms of sharing their likeness. We have Yuri Lowenthal from Spider-Man and Naruto, who he's himself a famous voice actor, but he's lending his likeness to the main character of Chris Williams. Again, too many Chris's. And then Chris Jai Alex is lending his to Preston. And then we have Ed Ross, and he's going to be doing it. So we have, just more creators that are going to be adding, and so you'll see them in different, let's say, in different parts pop up, maybe in unique ways. And but yeah, I think that's probably one of the cool things we can tease, is some of the creatives that we're having on the project, and how this is slightly different, because we've all seen the zombie movie, right? We've seen it at
Sure.
length, done really well, really poorly. And I think the cool thing about Frost Road is that it just looks at it from a different point of view. It tries to offer something to the reader that necessarily isn't seen through the modern kind of zombie thing. I mean, because The Walking Dead kind of cornered that market, so to speak. And, we're trying to do something a little bit different in a very gorgeous, beautiful hardcover.
I can't wait. Like, I'm super excited about this. The moment that we were connected, I was like, this is going to be so dope. And I'm super excited because of the hard work that you guys are already putting into it. And I know I said it at the beginning, guys, but I have their Kickstarter link down in the description. I can't wait for you guys to become a part of this as well. Something very important. But before I let you guys go, we all here at Sledgehammer Horror, our big thing is my first horror movie, where we bring guests on and talk to them about the first horror movie they watched and what it meant to them. So I gotta ask you now. Let's start with you, Chris. What was the first horror movie you ever watched?
Oh man. So the best answer. So I've loved horror, and I guess this is gonna be kind of a roundabout way answer. It's not like a direct horror thing, but just as a younger person, I'll say I'm from the 90s. So say whatever you want about that. But like, I was afraid of Jurassic Park as a kid, because as a little kid, you see that and the dinosaurs, like, are dinosaurs real? I don't know. Like, I know
Mhm.
it's not the most
Scary.
obvious answer, but I think one of that's one of them. And then the other one is I was a huge fan of The Page Master, and I don't know if you're familiar. It's with Macaulay Culkin, and it's basically kind
Macaulay
of like this
Culkin.
retro. Yeah, it's kind of one of that, like, live action animation hybrids that they tried, because they saw, Roger Rabbit, and they tried to do that. But one of them, so it's about this story about this kid who goes into a library with the storm, gets wrapped up in this library, and one of the first things he sees is horror, and it's basically like this animated retelling of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So, and I've always loved that movie. So again, not a direct horror per se, but if I had to give you a movie that was directly horror related, I have to say the Fly with Jeff
Oh,
Goldblum. That movie to me is just like the best one by far. And in my, like, I keep going back to it and things like that. And yeah, I think that's my
Well, and
direct
you even talk about Jurassic
answer.
Park, and like people say if that is or is not a horror film. Man, the whole part with the Raptor is like it's total slasher. Like he's chasing him, he wraps his claw around, he breathes on the glass. Like that's a total slasher trope wrapped up in a dinosaur movie. So yeah, to me, Jurassic Park, always a horror movie. So what about you, Keith? Do you remember your first horror movie?
I mean, it was kind of what I was a little mentioning a little bit earlier. When I was younger, I had seen Star Wars when I was a kid and loved sci-fi. And so when Alien was coming out, I went to my parents and I'm like, "Oh, here's a science fiction movie. Just because it's horror, I can handle this." And I was like 10 years old, right? And so when Alien came out in 70 millimeter in the theater, I was like front center watching that thing, and I was so ill-equipped to see that film at 10 years old because like when the chestburster scene happened. It's embarrassing to explain it, but like I didn't know how to react because I was so young and it was so graphic. And that scene even today and that whole movie I think still holds up in so many ways. And when that chestburster scene happened, I started to laugh because I didn't have any other emotion in me that understood
Right.
what to do, right? And I was kind of laughing, not because it was funny, because I literally just was so terrified. And I know that there was like some people in the audience going, "What the fuck is this kid doing laughing at this guy having his chest ripped apart by this xenomorph?" So that really did warp me in a great way, and I try to ignore most of the other Alien films. I think Alien and Aliens were pretty much the ones that kind of did it for me, and seeing Romulus now come back to that was a big part of that. But yeah, like during that time, it was The Thing, and it was The Shining, and American Werewolf in London, and all those classics that I kind of felt were like foundational films for horror coming up from the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and yeah, and everything, from Halloween and all those films, like I just loved watching those. And so
Yeah.
as horror really progressed, and now where you're seeing where the modern era of horror is, and even films like, even you see stuff like Smile, and you're like, wow, these are, I mean, the films, even the independent films right now are really well done, and it's getting to the point where horror has taken on a whole new, side of the industry. And I think you're seeing that in conventions, you're seeing that in the audience, and it's a great time to be creating horror.
Love it. The thing is, like I said, horror got us through the pandemic and it's kept us going since. Like people, indie horror, like it's amazing. Indie horror, you don't do that to make money, you do it to make your project and make your love, and it shows in those projects. So, um, unfortunately, guys, we are at the end of the third act. The credits are about to roll and the curtain's about to drop. But before that happens, I want to remind you to check out this Kickstarter and make sure you're following everybody on social media to make sure you can keep up with everything they're doing. Keith, Chris, please don't go anywhere. I got a couple more questions for you. Everybody else, if you haven't already, please like, comment, and subscribe. It does help build the channel more than you know. And follow Sledgehammer Horror on social media. Those links are in the description as well. But until next time, keep talking horror, stay what you are, and we'll see you guys soon.